Happy Tuesday. It's good to see you for this afternoon. I'm Edith Deschelle, the director of the E.W. Scripps School of Journalism, and my job is to welcome you back for the afternoon sessions of our Centennial Symposium, Gathering of Friends, which was made possible through the generous support of Smith and Patricia Schooneman. We had 15 years of Schooneman symposiums, or symposia, sorry. Oops. And so now we're celebrating 100 years of journalism education with this symposium. We have 17 alumni who've traveled from around the country to join us for 2 days to share with current students their experiences. And I just feel like, a proud mama, because I had all but 3 of the students in class, and it just feels like a family reunion. So it's good getting to talk to them. And I'd like to introduce my colleague who'll be the moderator for this session dealing with data journalism, Dr. Amy Edmondson, who teaches, of course, the data journalism class here, in addition to being the graduate director in the School of Journalism, in addition to being the interim graduate dean in the Scripps College of Communication. So, Dr. Edmondson, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. D. So great to be here with 2 former students. We've had quite a reunion here before the event kicked off. So want to introduce the 2 of them first, and then we have some questions that we're going to ask that Narisa, my boss, told me that would be good questions. And then I'm going to sneak in a few more because I am a data journalist and just cannot help to come up with a few more questions myself, right? And then we'll open it up for the rest of you to have a conversation with these 2 amazing grads. So let me do a quick bio of each and then we'll kick it off. Sandhya Kamampati. She's a data reporter for the Los Angeles Times Data Desk. She covers the demographics and diversity of California and the nation. At the Times, she's reported on COVID, protests, elections, you name it. She has previously worked at the Chronicle of Higher Education, Corrective, as well as ProPublica in Illinois. She co-reported some work on the widespread inaccuracies in Cook County's property tax assessment system, which was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for local reporting in 2018. It's a happy day. She trains journalists regularly as a speaker for Investigative Reporters and Editors, IRE, the leading organization for data journalism, as well as training people in her newsroom and anybody else who will ask her, she'll spread the gospel. She has reported and trained others on census data, statistics, any number of ways she can help people with statistics. Journalists, don't be afraid of math, she'll tell you. The Freedom of Information laws, state sunshine laws, anything related to data analysis, she's willing to share with her colleagues. She graduated from Ohio as the outstanding overall senior in 2013. Taylor Murfinderesky is a 2-time Peabody Award-winning investigative reporter for KING5 in Seattle. She specializes in multimedia journalism, long-form storytelling, and digital special projects that combine text, video, photos, and graphics. Taylor's investigations have uncovered many wrongs, including the punishment of foster youth, law enforcement cover-ups, and unjustified separation of children from their parents. Her multimedia written narratives about subjects such as racial identity and recidivism showcase some of her greatest strengths, building a deep level of trust with sources, following them over time, and capturing compelling, raw details that bring her stories to life in the narrative. Her work has garnered other top awards in journalism, including a Scripps Howard Award, 2 National Edward R. Murrow Awards as well. In 2022, she was named DuPont Columbia Awards finalist and an IRE finalist for her reporting on Washington State's mistreatment of hard-to-place foster youth. These are really hard stories to get at. The National Press Photographers Association twice recognized Taylor's work in its Best of Photojournalism contest, including a first place award for investigative video photojournalism in 2021. Also that year, she was named an Online Journalism Awards finalist for multimedia reporting on George Floyd's biracial cousin. She's listed as one of America's best young journalists, with a Livingston Award finalist 2 times. And before joining KING5, she was a WCPO in Cincinnati. In 2014, she was embedded with the U.S. military in Afghanistan to cover the local impact of America's longest war. Whew. All right, and with that, we will take off with some questions. Thank you so much for being here again. I should have had you in class earlier. We just finished data journalism. So I'm gonna see if I can talk them into staying and come into class on Thursday. So we're gonna cover things from reporting tips, care and feeding of sources, how to detail a story from beginning to end, that kind of thing. But before we do, one of our questions that we always tell our students who are here is, how do you get from being a student here in Scripps to where you are now? So I would love for both of you to walk us briefly through your origin story, if you would, and then we'll jump into these other detailed questions. But let's start with Sandhya.
Sure. So I have always been interested in investigative journalism. I was interested in numbers, and I took Amy Edmondson's class, actually, and that's the reason I would say that I'm in data journalism now. I took her class sophomore year of college. I convinced Dr. Stewart to let me take the class as a sophomore. I think it was not allowed at the time. And I took econ, and I really liked stats, and so I took a lot of stats classes, and then we went to NICAR in Louisville, actually, and that was the first time I met people at the National Institute of Computer Assisted Reporting Conference, where these people were all interested in spreadsheets and organization and interviewing people and writing, and I was like, wow, these are my people. So that's pretty much how I ended up where I am. Yeah.
And I always knew I wanted to be a journalist since I was 10, 11. So I came here, and starting when I was a freshman, I just tried to get involved with whatever I could. I joined SPJ, RTDNA, I worked for WUB. Before I did work for WUB, I would just start finding a way to produce content on my own, and just taking up every opportunity that there was available. So when they would bring in speakers, I would be there to watch and learn, and basically learned every skill I could possibly learn to take me into the world of digital journalism, which is how I got my start. But always when I was reporting, I was thinking I just want to go deeper. I want to tell a longer form story. And I just always knew that was my calling, was to do stories that were beyond the news of the day, that really answered the why. And so every move I made was to try to reach that goal and make that happen. And so my first job out of college was working for WCPO in Cincinnati, where I was a digital reporter doing enterprise stories. And then I got my job at King, where I've been an investigative reporter. So all the experiences at OU led me to this moment, for sure.
Great, thank you. And that's a great segue into the media outlets and organizations that you were involved in, Sandhya, while you were here, and then out into the real world, as they say.
Yeah, so I was involved in SPJ, WAB, RTDNA while I was here, and yeah, I loved it.
So it sounds like these outside organizations helped your careers in addition to the coursework. Could you expand a little bit on what it meant to leave Ohio with WOUB experience under your belt and these required internships?
I think the first advantage was just doing the work while you're in college, having that reporting experience, and then also being exposed to professionals, finding I still have mentors that I developed in college that I'll use in my professional world today. And so I think just getting that exposure to people who who would help me get better, and then being able to practice the skill that then I now go do for a living way earlier than a lot of people. I mean, we at WAB and all the other opportunities on campus had, we were doing stories for real people in the community. So I think that work was just paramount in being able to do it well outside, because we've already, had that years of professional experience while in college.
Yeah. Ditto what Taylor said, but I think, but in all seriousness, I mean, I feel like I learned so much just by going out and reporting in West Virginia, Kentucky, as well as here. And I think getting that experience of really traveling throughout the region and being able to report on different areas was just pretty amazing. So.
Share your favorite memory from your time in the journalism school and why it means so much.
For me, it's hard to pinpoint. First of all, my memory's bad after all these years, but it's hard to pinpoint one moment, but I can speak to something more generally that I still remember, was the impact that when I worked for SP, or when I volunteered with SPJ and RTDNA, we would go out of our way to bring in speakers and find people that we wanted to learn from. And I always remember learning the most from just like those extracurricular things, sitting there and attending those and being able to talk to the people afterwards and find out, like, just finding what people who had the skills that I wanted to get. And so I just remember all the planning that went into those events. But I think I'm hoping that I know that they still do that here. And if you're in school, I would go to them, because it can be a lot to do it after a long day of classes. But that was the most valuable thing for me, and my favorite memories were usually in those after class programs.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I also think just being able to be a student and really soak up everything that you can on campus, and just really asking a lot of questions and meeting people from different backgrounds, I think is really helpful too. I highly recommend joining SPJ if you haven't already, and RTDNA. But I also think that one of the things that I did was email a lot of journalists and just ask them questions and ask them how they got to where they are, and that helped me a lot. I think one of my professors asked me to do that for an assignment, and I followed that year after year, basically.
A big source of stress, of course, is rustling up that first internship, or maybe the second internship for that matter. Walk us through how you navigated that as undergrads, because as we all know, our students are responsible for finding their own internships, though you have significant support from the college and the school. Walk us through getting in that first door.
So I did my internship at CNN my sophomore year, and I had experience from WAB doing video editing and shooting video, and so I applied for the internship, and they said, wow, you have real world experience, which a lot of students don't have because their schools don't offer a program like WAB. So I think getting the on the ground experience, actually video editing, so I could go and start my internship and use Final Cut and shoot video and do all of that was really beneficial.
For me, I interned at NBC4 in Columbus, WCMH, and then I did an internship at the Today Show, and then an internship at Weekend Nightly News. And like Sandhya said, having like a portfolio or real world examples to show was pretty key, I think. Networking with the people who are coming to campus to say, hey, I really want, just always asking, like, do you have something? Or if I want to do this, what do I need to do? Though asking those kind of questions and then acting on their feedback was key. And in order to have a portfolio, I, had to have somewhere to put it. So having like a website or some way to show people your work, handing out business cards, just doing typical networking things were really, really important in landing those opportunities. But yeah, just identifying, like, if you have a goal, finding someone who will help you figure out how to get there is key.
Oh, and I'll add that in Amy Edmondson's class, I took the computer assisted reporting class, and we had to produce a data driven story in that class. And because I wrote that story, I was able to give it to my, like, as a clip for my internship at USA Today. And I was on their data team there. And they, again, computer assisted reporting sounds foreign now because everything is computer assisted reporting, but Excel assisted reporting, I guess, is what we should call it. You know, I was able to work with like jump right in and basically use SQL and Excel and code just from her class. So
Was that the boil order project?
that was.
I remember that beast. Ah, yes. File the FOIA. Walk us through just briefly. I know it's like way back, just very briefly, what
man.
that entailed.
I don't know if Athens still gets that. I think they probably do, actually, these boil order notices for the water here. And I was like, what is this? Why does this keep happening? Do they keep data on it? So I asked for a decade's worth of data, which in hindsight is a bad idea because I asked for all of the data instead of just like a small segment of the data. And they were like, no way, we're not giving it to you. That's too much work. And then they gave me like a year's worth of data, and it was all PDFs that they printed out. And so actually, I think they gave me some printed out, and then I had to go print it. I think I printed it at Alden. It racked up a big bill at Alden, and then brought them to your office. And I was like, what do I do with this now? I have all this data, but I have to put it into a spreadsheet. How do I do this? So that was fun.
I remember that well. These just stacks. Every sheet was a boil order,
order.
and then every row of her spreadsheet was a boil order. So, yep. So, in terms of your journey to the job you have now, if you could walk us through some of the steps along the way that were pivotal as a way to inform our students, okay, how do we get from here to here? That would be great.
I think that the way I was able to get the job I have today was, first of all, like taking classes that would teach me each skill I needed to know. And while you don't have to be a master of all trades, I think it really helped me stand out in big markets early on in my career, because not everyone could do everything. And I know things have changed and most people are expected to. But I, took a photography class, and I took a data journalism class, and video, print writing, web design. I mean, I just really wanted to understand all facets of like what it is to produce content, and then have some level of familiarity, and I could figure out what I wanted to be really, really good at. But that was a way for me to then, I knew how to produce that kind of content. And I said, not only can I do a print story, but I can take the photos for it too, and they're going to be good photos, or I can do it just understanding how different mediums work. That's what I would say as far as the strategy I had, and then actually producing the content like I've mentioned before, going out and into the community to do interviews, and then constantly seeking feedback. I know that it can be really scary to have someone look at your work and you think it's the greatest thing, you put all your heart into it and you think it's the best thing, and I've done that many times, and then I show it to somebody that I admire and they're like, this is all wrong, and then they help you. You just have to like get a very thick skin and I want people to tear up my work now when I send it to an editor or a mentor, because it makes me better, it helps me learn. And so I think just constantly finding people that you admire and seeking that feedback. And then as I was able to keep getting better and listen to their feedback, then I was able to get good jobs. And I still do that. I still have people, and I'm like, well, what can I, as I'm working on a story, I'm constantly asking people who know better than me, how do I do what it needs to happen here? So having that mindset, I think, will go a long way in your career. And even if you don't decide to do journalism, but just anything, finding people that you admire and learning from them.
Yeah, I think one of the things for me is I always asked a lot of questions, but I always also asked a lot of questions about what else can I learn that's like besides just journalism. Because I think for me, I combine stats and journalism, and doing data journalism specifically, you kind of have to keep up with the coding and what's the newest processing tool, or Python or R or Ruby or all these different programming languages, and it's just a lot. And when I was in college, I think I started to learn HTML, CSS, and I started to teach myself Python, and then basically just read a lot of books. And so I think for me, the way that I ended up in my job is just keep learning and just keep reading, even as an adult. I feel like, I don't know, the college experience is great, but you got to keep learning every year because there's new skills, new data analysis skills that I learn every single day. And I think if I stopped at just one point, I think I would find my job difficult.
And just to add to that, keeping learning. I mean, one thing that I found useful was going to conferences. I still do it now, but when I was in school and now, I mean, there's the Investigative Reporters and Editors Conference. From a visual standpoint, there's MPPA, just all sorts of places where their whole purpose is to teach you skills that you don't know. So if it's an opportunity that you have, I would take advantage of it, because not only can you meet people there, but then you can learn something that you haven't before. Or the SPJ conference, there's just so many to name, but that's one good place to do it.
So we talked about classes that have been helpful in preparing you for your career, and we've talked about data journalism, shameless plug, as well as photojournalism classes. Are there any other classes specifically that you would recommend that students take?
I mean, I think the things I would recommend are already probably required, like media ethics, media law,
Yeah, that's what I was
basic
gonna say, too.
reporting, just understanding how, yeah, I think that's all probably a requirement. But finding like if there's a subject that you're interested in, it's good. It's a great idea to become really knowledgeable about that subject, and then you can do stories about it. So outside of journalism, but not for me, it's just wasn't one that comes to mind that I'm like, oh, beyond what I've already shared.
Yeah, same. I think media ethics, though, is like probably the key one, which I think is part of the core curriculum. It should be. It is, I think. And statistics, I think, for me, is really helpful. I know journalists say they don't like math or can't do math, but I don't believe that. And I think that everyone should take at least 2 stats classes because it's really helpful. And even if you know basic statistics, it's really helpful for if you want to do data journalism, especially, or do like a bigger and deep dive into data. I would also say business classes. I wish I took more of them because as an adult, I've done a lot of stories on municipal finance, and I've had to read a lot of business books, but I've not actually taken a ton of business classes when I was in college. So that's one thing that I would recommend, but I did not take, full disclosure.
I wish I took stats classes. Like that's a skill that I'm teaching myself still, but just having that foundation would definitely be helpful when you're looking at spreadsheets and learning data.
So we always tell our students it's much easier to be a journalist than it is to be a student journalist, because you don't have all those classes to take and all the different things you have to do to navigate being a college student. And I always say, just hold on, because it's going to be a lot better when this is all you do all day. It's going to be great. And so with that, I wanted to ask you, what's the best part of the job you have now?
For me, it's I feel that I get to directly see the impact of my work. The stories that I pursue are usually things that have the potential to drive change. Otherwise, we're probably not going to invest our time, because investigative journalism is an expensive place. Not every newsroom has it, and they don't always give the resources to it. So in order for us to spend sometimes months working on a story, we have to make the pitch of why should we spend this time. And so we always look for subjects that are going to make a difference. So when you change a law, or you have, you directly are able to point to like, I did that, my reporting helped change that. That's like why I do this. And to expose the secrets that no one wants you to know, it makes it really rewarding.
Yeah, I would second that and say that I also really enjoy just hearing people say that they learned something new from the reporting, or they learned something about their government that they didn't know existed before, or a process that they didn't know existed before because of my reporting, and also just meeting really interesting people. I don't know, like you get to do all different subjects, and meet people from all different backgrounds and all over the world. And I don't think I could do any other job, but yeah.
So now we're going to ask you to tell us a story. We'd love to hear you detail a story from start to finish, how you got the idea, and then just walk us through briefly how you did the reporting, how you got the information, and actually got it out there.
I did a series called After Hours Fostering Chaos that focused on, we got a tip basically from just this anonymous person saying that Washington foster kids were spending the night in cars. And it was one of those tips we were like, what? Like, it's just so outlandish that you're like, this can't be real. And our job is to show, to prove it. We can't do a story just based on a random person's tip. And the challenge here was that, we're communicating through this with this person who, isn't willing to go on the record. And we're like trying to find a way to prove it. And because child welfare records are protected, a lot of them, it's very hard to, usually my first step is to look for, what kind of paper trail is there? We need documentation. And so it was very hard, we eventually were able to get records, but that wasn't the first way we were able to do this for the story. So what I decided to do was I was like, okay, well, I'm going to talk to the social workers who are on the inside of the Washington State's agency. And if you cover any kind of agency or people who work in government or a lot of people aren't supposed to talk to you, right? So how do you get to them? So I was able to, in my case, I used LinkedIn and a couple other ways to get to the people who directly worked with these kids. And these were foster kids who they had a lot of behavioral challenges, a lot of instability, and they were hard to place kids. There was nowhere for them to go. And so I was trying to just kind of learn more about how this process works. And so I reached out to dozens of people who worked with these kids in the agencies and ended up getting people to talk to me and confirm that, yes, this was happening. They were spending the night in cars as a form of punishment and in offices, state offices, when they acted out or when they wouldn't go into their foster home placement. And that not only that, but they were being forced to blast the air conditioning to make them. The supervisors were telling the social workers that make this kid cold so they'll go inside, or keep them up all night. These like coercive tactics that shouldn't happen. And so we built this whole investigation, but it was just finding a way to get inside. And finding what was really going on. And it was one of those stories that you can do investigations a lot of different ways, but this is one that was really bolstered by the strength and the numbers. And then we got the documentation and we're able to confirm these examples. But that was the way we started that investigation, and it ended up being like a multi-part series. And it did result in change. But it was a tricky one. And that's kind of the hardest thing, is just like, you always have to be able to prove, in all of journalism, but especially when you're doing something extremely high stakes, you need to see proof. You can't just have some random person tell you something's happening. And so finding creative ways to get to the bottom of it was a great example of an investigation where we had to get creative in order to get it off the ground running.
Yeah, that's a shocking story.
It was one of those where you're like, this can't be real.
Yeah, it's wild. I at the LA Times, I worked on a story just recently on the mayor's election. We looked at census data, and so basically what we did was we took election results and we took demographic data for all of LA County, and basically took the census data and reapportioned it. And by that I mean we basically took the census numbers that are available and fit them into the little precincts, which are smaller geography. And so we could say, this area voted, like one specific neighborhood in LA voted more for one specific candidate. And we were able to do a data visualization so that people can kind of scroll around on the map and see what the demographics of their neighborhood is and how it compares to the rest of LA. And I think that was one of the most rewarding stories that I've done recently, in the sense that we had so many readers reach out to us and say, this is like helpful context to know like what the demographics of our area is. And important information, election results. Everyone cares about who gets voted into office. So, yeah.
Great, great. So we're looking for things relating to reporting tips, whether it's care and feeding of sources or how to get that public record or what have you. So what advice do you have for our students today on these particular areas or any areas relating to reporting?
The first thing I would say is I think this goes for both reporting and also when you're networking. This is a good tip is you don't want to have transactional relationships. You don't just talk to somebody when you want something. And I think that when it comes to reporting, and if you're people are not stupid, they can sense when you're just using them and swooping in for a big story versus when you genuinely care. And you might have the people when the breaking news hits who don't want to talk. But if you keep in touch with them and just check in on them, they might want to talk like months later, years later. I mean, I think a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just set like source dates where I'll just somebody that is involved in an area that I'm interested in covering or that might have stories on the road. I'll just set up coffee meetings with them. Or if somebody's really hesitant, because in my job, if I talk to them, I probably have to have them go on camera, but I don't just write them off if they say I'm not going to go on camera. So you don't show up with the camera right away. I mean, you just have to make people comfortable. And the same goes for the way I've developed mentors in my career, and when I'm looking, I don't just go looking for opportunities, but just like you approach people because you genuinely want to learn something from them. And then it's a back and forth. And I think that is one way that you're going to get good stories, good jobs, good opportunities, all the above, just by having that mindset.
Yeah, I would also say that like understanding how people in our government work. I know as a data reporter, I just like love to go and just watch people work, just to like see what they're doing. And that sounds like very basic, but also and maybe somewhat boring for some people, but just like observing the way that the public records officer literally does their job and seeing that they have to like spend 15 minutes trying to log into their computer, and then when they get in, they're like trying to figure out the backlog of their FOIA requests. So like, okay, I'm not going to send my records request at 10 a.m. when they get in because that's when they have their backlog. So I like make a note of it, and then I'm like, okay, well, I'll send it at 12 o'clock when they're actually got through their backlog, and that's going to be right at the top of their inbox. Or I'll ask them like, okay, well, this records request you're getting, like, how would you simplify that? Or like they're sending a rejection letter, so how would you send the request in the first place so that you wouldn't actually get rejected? I think being able to see that firsthand is really helpful. And then also just seeing how they do the data entry process, because you can see from a data standpoint where they might have typos, or are they inputting it from a paper document, or are they using a system? On the data end of it, I always like to ask like what programming software they're using, and then sometimes I will just write the code for them and give it to them and say, here, just run this. Like, I know your table name, so just do that. Yeah, I think that's really like, I don't know. I know that's a little more like in-depth and intrusive, but I think it's useful to find all the secrets of the government. I don't know.
It's kind of like Nerds Unite when you get back there with the data nerd in the corner.
Yeah, another tip is always like for me, I find a lot of my investigations by looking through documents. I mean, a lot of things are like built through documents, but I'll get back to that in a second. I just thought of my main point was that the power of details, whether you're an investigative reporter or you're not, I think that great stories have really good details. And so paying attention to things when you're out in the field, like what does it smell like? I mean, just things, what color was it? Ask very detailed questions, because when you separate a great story or a good story from a great story, it's because you remember the details. So you remember the person's story, like the character that you're focusing in on. It's not just like a report, it's a story. But also there's nothing better than when you're going through those documents and you just see that detail and you're like, that's it. That's like, you're looking for that detail always. That makes your stuff, that's how you get the big scoop. So just having that mindset, that's really helped me. And that's when I look at work that I admire, I always question, like, why do I like this? Like, what is it about it? And usually it's because of the way that they've used details in their reporting.
Yeah. I think also checking the footnotes as well is really important, because footnotes are usually where they have like the table or the document or the person that they've referred to and are referencing throughout the whole document, but it's just like a tiny asterisk. And you're like, where is that actual document? That's the one you want to go read. I think that's like one of the biggest tips I have for reporting is just read the footnotes and ask a lot of questions, and also go to trade conferences too, because I think that they have like realtors conferences, conferences that are around surrounding your beat, because I think that helps a lot in just like understanding how people outside of journalism think, which is really important.
I also think just asking people, when people come to us with tips or ideas or they're talking to you, always ask them, like, how do you know what you know? That's people, everybody's hears rumors that they think they're the expert, but you want to get, like she said, as close to the source as possible. Why are you talking to me? You know, you just want to know what their motivation is. You have to just constantly be skeptical, and really try to get to the source and the root of it, and try to get as thorough as you can when it comes to supporting. You know, you not try to, but you have to support your facts. So that's where that question comes in handy. Um, I think on both day turns and investigations.
We talk a lot about great writing and how to bring the reader in after you've done all this heavy lifting with your data work or your reporting. So I want to ask you guys both, who are your favorite writers? Who do you recommend that students read? Because we always say, read great writing. Read it the first time as a reader and read it the second time as a writer. Who do you read? Who do you recommend?
For broadcast, my writing mentor has been John Larson, he's no longer working in broadcast, but he has taught me what makes a great story. You know, I think um, I always watch his old stuff back. He's just the arc, the surprises. I think that's when you're trying to learn. It's like, when I say, like, read who you want to be like, it's like, why do you like that story? And a lot of times it's because they're like sprinkling gold coins throughout the story. And if it's a long story, especially like the kind of stuff that we're usually doing, you have to, each part has to keep carrying the story forward. And so he's one of my mentors when it comes to writing for broadcast.
I would say in terms of data journalism, Rob Gebeloff at the New York Times does a lot of census reporting, and I always admire his reporting, as well as Ginger Thompson at ProPublica. She does fantastic investigative stories, and I just think what Taylor said, you got to really hook the reader and have a lot of details. And I think the best kind of, I know that you didn't ask this, but the best kind of data journalism stories, I think, are stories that just are about people and tell you the story of the person. It starts with a person, because numbers are fine, but you know, the people are the reason why we're doing the story, right? And the best data journalism stories you can't even tell are done by numbers, or they did a ton of work using numbers. They'll have one stat in there. You're like, oh, okay, but that one stat probably took like months and months to do, but it's there.
So I have one more scripted question. So as I ask that, please go ahead and feel free to make your way up to the microphone here in the middle of the aisle, and we'll start taking questions from the audience. But as people are doing this, I wanted to ask you, given that journalists' credibility has been questioned at the highest levels of power in our political system, I wanted to ask you both, how, if at all, has that changed what you do, how you do it, how you interact with the public? How do you handle it?
One of the things that I've done, I actually partnered with an organization called the Trust Project, and they worked with RTDNA and some other organizations to teach the public, to tell them how we do our jobs. I was a trust ambassador, so one of the things that went into that was showing, like, okay, here, like, there are these different trust indicators that help you know when you're consuming the news and that it's trustworthy. So like everything from looking at the journalist's expertise. Does the story have references? Did they cite? So I think helping the public understand what we do and being transparent about it is how we get away from the people who are not trusting the news. I mean, it's because they don't understand our jobs, and there's going to be some people who never are going to trust the news because they're not willing to. But I think the biggest thing we can do is to let them into our process and show them how we do our jobs. I think, a lot of people make assumptions in this business, and they meet you and they're like, oh, you're a fake news reporter, but they don't even know what that means. They don't even know what a reporter means because they don't know how we do our jobs. And so finding that, attacking it that way has been my approach, and I think it's helped some people.
Yeah, I would agree. I think from the data standpoint, people are always like, "Oh, the data's wrong. You cooked the data or whatever." And it's, I just say, "Okay, come. I will join you on Zoom. I will come to your house. I will do whatever you'd like. I will show you the documents. We can sit through and talk about it." And I'm happy to do that. But we also, for all of our stories, we put methodology out there so that the public knows how we did it. We often put our code and everything up on a website called GitHub, which stores code, and so people can literally run our code, and if they can't run it from start to finish, I will show them how to do it, and they can go ahead and do that and check our work. And then in terms of source building, I've had when I do interviews, I often tell people, like, let's just have a conversation. Like I think Taylor referred to it earlier, not bringing the camera in right away. I don't use cameras often, but even just like holding my recorder or even recording the conversation, I'll say, let's just have a conversation. Have you talked to a reporter before? So a lot of people just haven't had an experience with a reporter before. They're nervous. They don't know what to answer. They don't know how to answer. They're worried that whatever they say is going to be put right on the record right away. We're going to print it. Like, I'm going to call my editor and say, run it. It's like they see it in the movies. I'm like, that's not how that happens, but sure. So I think just being really transparent and being empathetic, I think it's really important that reporters be empathetic, because I think that, we're all humans. So that's, yeah, anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I think we have some questions.
Hello. Okay, so I have two questions. The first one is, both of you have covered issues that might make you a target in your community from like the people in power, whether that's the government or the police. How do you deal with the pressures from that, and how do you protect yourself from any sort of ramifications? And the other question is, what is the most infuriating response to a FOIA you have received?
I'll take the second question because it gives me great joy, so much that I printed it out and it's hanging in my apartment. Someone called me annoying, this like annoying girl in a FOIA request, and they copied me on email and emailed me back saying, this girl is really annoying. And I'm like, wow, great. And then I responded and I said, hey, I'm still here. And so they were like, oh, whoops. And then I got my records request in like the next like 20 minutes. So I don't think that's gonna happen again. Yeah. What about you, Taylor?
I just got one that said 2026 was when they were going to give me my records.
Oh,
That's a good one. Or another one where they, I put a request in to a federal agency, and they said, like, okay, they just didn't reply. And then 2 years later, they gave me a response saying, because of our records retention schedule, that they no longer existed. The records were gone because it had been 2 years. So.
Don't forget that first part of the question about have you felt that your safety or security was at risk, or threats, coercion from public officials?
I don't know that I've ever felt coercion or any of that, but I will say that like I do get like I've gotten a lot of hate mail, and especially after Trump being in office, I've gotten a lot of racist hate mail, and I just delete it or just don't look at it too much. Or if it's really of a concern, I'll talk to my editor. But usually I don't engage with the people that are calling me vile things. I've gotten a lot of voicemails, and I just don't. Yeah, it is hard though, because you're like, you want to hear what they are saying, but I think it's also it's deciding when to engage and when not to engage, because sometimes giving them more fuel to just keep going. But in terms of like government officials, the story that I think Amy referenced in my bio, on the assessor's office in Cook County, he held a press conference the day after our story published, to say that the story was completely wrong, and we had lawyers at ProPublica that basically backed us up and said, yeah, well, please tell us where we went wrong, and you really can't. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, just having like that bulletproof story and then being able to defend it. But I do welcome feedback. I mean, I think we all should welcome feedback from our viewers or and our audience. From a safety standpoint, I always just loop in my editors. A lot of times, sorry, I'm like losing my voice. A lot of times journalists, especially multimedia journalists, people usually fresh out of college, and I'm an MMJ myself, I'm always mindful of where I'm going. I let someone know where I'm going because I'm going by myself a lot of times. I think that's paramount, and that's my biggest safety concern. So I always just make sure that if I do have a safety concern, I let someone know in advance. I make sure somebody's with me. I think we all should be mindful of that, but that would be the biggest thing that happens. And then we've had people in my investigative unit who they have been the targets of threats. People have come to their house, and so that's something where our managers get involved. Usually the reporter will go to a hotel. It's not something that I've experienced where I felt like in physical danger, thank goodness, but I think just having that, being aware, because you just never know what can happen. We all see what happens all the time, so being aware of your surroundings and letting people know so you're safe.
And I would say also just making sure you kind of keep track of what your online presence is. So I regularly check for what's out there on me, just like my address, or what is my home address there, is my parents' home address online. And I go and delete them where I can. A lot of data mining firms, there's a lot of apps out there that you can tell the data mining firms to basically not show your data. It sometimes costs a small fee, but some newsrooms can cover that as well. So, yeah.
Other questions from the audience?
Hello. I think it's awesome you guys are in newsrooms that really value investigations, but that's, as we know, not always the case because of how resource intense it can be. So I was curious if you for the people who are in those environments where you don't really get the resources you need for that, like if you have any advice to share on how they could help to like get it through, or to give them their elevator pitch to be able to do the investigation they want to do.
Yeah, there are a lot of things. I think one thing is to, even after a daily story, there's probably some records you can request that might not show up for months, but you have to think in that mindset of like, what can I find out that might not produce right now, but that might be a huge reward later. So thinking like, if I'm doing a story where there was a crime, you want to get the police report, you might not even get it that day, but maybe you'll see a trend later on. Or maybe there's data that might show you a bigger issue. And then also just like having a passion project on the side. So a lot of times when you can't, if you can't get something that you want to do, just work on it on your off time, just a couple hours here and there, and then you'll be able to show it later on. And then I think the biggest thing is making a case for yourself of, don't wait for opportunities to come to you, but make the opportunity. So don't wait for somebody to assign you a great story that's going to be digging. You have to bring that to your manager and keep bringing it to your manager until they say like, I need to give this person time to work on investigations, or to work on the longer form stuff. And so sometimes that does require you having to spend some extra hours on your own time. For me, and I think for other people, but then you get to that point where you're just the go-to person for that.
Yeah, I think also just being like proactive, and just, so for me, what I do is I often just collect data as I think of it. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna ask these people for a certain data set. I don't know, how many fireworks were went off in a certain neighborhood or something, or the 311 calls, or the garbage truck route or something. I don't know. Just keep asking questions and then keep it. One example of that I can give is we did a story when the protests happened in 2020, and we had LAPD had their record manuals for how they handle protests, and I had requested that back in 2019 when I first started at the LA Times. And I had those, and I knew, okay, they're not actually trained to do specific things, and they're how they're handling the protests, like actually touching people or pushing them or harming them. And so I had those documents ahead of time, and so when the protests happened, we were able to get the footage, the video footage, and then basically stop the videos where the police officers doing something that they weren't supposed to do, and then find the document and like highlight that. And we had like a multimedia presentation that we were able to do really quickly, and that was because we had those documents ready to go. So I think just like Taylor said, being prepared, but also just like carving out time, because this type of work takes a lot of time. So
it could even be like every Friday or every Friday I'm going to check on my records requests. Like I think staying organized too. Like I have I have spreadsheets to organize my life. Mm-hmm. So a spreadsheet for all my records requests, and I can just check in. I mean, there's ways to make it so you don't have to spend as much time on it yourself, or like have a source list. So when you need somebody in a pinch, you got it right there. I think those kind of strategies will help you in the long run, spend more time on doing what you want to do.
And if you're not a spreadsheet person, you can become a spreadsheet person, or you can use Muckrock to follow your records requests, because they will literally send the reminders for you. So if you don't want to do that, you can just use their service, and it's great. Would recommend it, but it'll be public then. So
just want to remind the audience that our next session begins at 3:30 p.m. titled Strategy, the Ones Who Manage the Marketplace. Dr. Edmondson, I'll let you wrap things up.
Okay, so without any other questions, what did we not ask you? What must you leave us as you impart your knowledge?
Anybody who wants help or wants any, guidance, I'm always happy to be a resource. So please reach out. My Twitter handle is Taylor Murph, MIRF, or you can just come up to me after.
That's the same. My email's just my first name, Sandhya@latimes.com. It's the best way to reach me. I don't check Twitter as much. But yeah, I'm happy to help, and go to IRE, go to NICAR. I'm not saying take a class by me, but you can come learn Excel by one of the trainers at NICAR, and be converted too. We need more nerds.
It can seem really overwhelming when you're getting into investigative journalism, but it doesn't have to be. So I think, just take bite-sized pieces, put in a records request once a week or something small, and then build up to it. You can do a lot with it.
Taylor, Sandhya, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.